A follow-up to an ongoing story KPBS has covered over the last 2 years. Threats against local elected officials. Last month, we reported on new research showing that Instagram does little to stem harassment of women politicians. Now the University of San Diego has expanded its study of harassment and intimidation. KPBS's Amitha Sharma tells us about the findings, and she joins us now. Welcome, Amitha.
It's good to talk to you, Maya.
You have reported on this topic quite a bit. What did USD learn from its latest look at threats against women politicians?
That's right. We have quite a body of work on this issue. I want to give you a quick recap of the past reporting. Last year, USD asked people who hold public office about how often people try to intimidate them. That survey found 66% of male office holders reported being threatened or harassed, compared to 82% of their female counterparts. And 2/3 of those polled said the intimidation has worsened since they first entered office. This year, USD broadened its poll of elected officials to include not just San Diego County, but Imperial and Riverside counties as well. And here are some highlights. 2/3 of elected officials in these three counties reported being threatened and harassed, and more than half thought it was enough of an issue to contact police. 69% of women said they were targets monthly, compared to 38% of male politicians. And once again, Maya, you can see that women are bearing the brunt of the hostility. Back in May, I spoke to John Porton. He is a researcher at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, which oversaw the study. He spoke to me before the findings had been released, and he elaborated on women politicians as targets of threats.
We feel really strongly that the conclusion is that women are experiencing a volume of threats almost an order of magnitude worse than men. And the second thing that I really want to highlight is that over the last year, we've started to hear many more reports about hostility within the board. That some of the harassment and threats are coming from people who serve on the board with the people who are respondents to our surveys.
Some sobering information there, but Amitha, women have been in politics for decades. Are these kinds of threats really that new?
That is the question, and the answer is no. Last year, I interviewed former National City Mayor Alexandra Sotelo Solis, and she said there was a man in 2014 who used to regularly harass her at council meetings, and she always thought he was being encouraged, egged on to do this by a political peer, a fellow male colleague. Here she is describing how that man spoke to her outside a council meeting 10 years ago.
You're a bitch, and you are a dog on a leash, and you're wrong.
Okay, so Amitha, tell us, what is the purpose of this study?
Well, USD states the purpose in that study, and it reiterates that, look, there is a difference between the freedom to express dissent and the deliberate use of intimidation or violence against public officials to influence policy. The university is trying to figure out whether we at the local level are approaching that line, in the middle of crossing that line, or have already crossed it into what they call fear-based government. USD has collected some data on the effect of the threats, and that includes a finding that elected officials are already censoring themselves or being silent, period, on policy issues because of this intimidation. And Maya, you know, I had a sobering conversation last month with Imran Ahmed. He started the Center for Countering Digital Hate and studied highly toxic Instagram posts related to 10 well-known women politicians, including Vice President Kamala Harris and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. And he has firsthand knowledge of what can happen if this abuse of women politicians in general, is left unchecked.
And it translates to offline activity. Look, I started this work because a colleague of mine in the British Parliament was murdered by a man who thought that he would use bullets, knives, and his fists to beat to death a woman for the beliefs that she had. And these will become more frequent events if we see the normalization of extreme hate against women.
And Maya, the name of that politician is Jo Cox, who was a member of the British Parliament until she was stabbed and shot to death by a white supremacist. Emmett says one way you start to deal with the toxicity aimed at politicians, especially women, is to require social media platforms to enforce their own rules on the books right now on threats and harassment.
Amitha, thank you so much for this very necessary context to an important issue.
Thank you for having me, Maya.
And this story is part of our Public Matters project, a partnership with iNewsSource and Voice of San Diego. You can find more of our stories at kpbs.org/publicmatters.